Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to go over watercolor pencil. I'm going to show you some basics on how to get started with watercolor pencil, some tips on how to get some interesting textures, and how to create shadows and highlights. In this video, I'm working with 3 different kinds of watercolor pencil. I'm using the Derwent regular watercolor pencil, the Derwent Inktense watercolor pencil, and the Faber-Castell, what is it? Albrecht, I'm probably pronouncing that all wrong, watercolor pencil. Okay? And the exact colors and the rest of the supplies I use in this video are in the description box below. Now, when I use watercolor pencils, I start by using techniques that I use with color pencils. And I have a whole shading basics video for color pencils already posted, and I'll drop a link somewhere in the description box, on the end screen, whatever. It's in my Fundamentals Fridays playlist. But when you first get started, I lay down the color pencil, and I work evenly so that there's even paint distribution. And any place I want it lighter, I color less, and any place I want it darker, I color more. It's kind of the nice thing about watercolor pencils is it's like a paint where you don't need to buy a whole lot to get a large range of colors and different values, because you can manipulate by mixing colors and also make things lighter and darker by how much water you add. So here, look, I have a lot of red for my shadow areas, and I left the white of the paper for areas I want to highlight, just like I would with color pencil. But I'm going to activate the paint with water so that it looks like paint, like painterly, In this video, I'm using water brushes. Like, you can definitely use regular brushes with watercolor pencils, but I did want to show you guys the water brushes because I really do enjoy them for watercolor pencil. Because one of the things I love most about watercolor pencil is how portable they are. So when I want to paint while I'm traveling, be that the coffee shop down the street or Paris, whatever, I can take them and they're not messy. And I can take these water brushes to activate the paint, and again, not messy, and I don't need a giant cup of water. I do occasionally carry like a tiny canister of water, and that's really all I need when I'm using these water brushes. But yeah, you can do all these techniques with a standard brush and a jar of water. I always like to have paper towel on hand to clean off the edges, because if you're not cleaning off the bristles of your brush, you're just pushing the color. And so if you want to blend out and get lighter and soften edges, you have to remove all the color that's deposited on your brush to do that. This is the one I'm using right now is a Derwent Inktense, and they ain't lying. This is intense. Like, the color is so much more intense and vibrant than in any other watercolor pencil that I've used ever. And I personally love it, but it took a minute. It took a hot minute to get used to it, because I was so used to how much color the other pencils deposited that when I was initially laying down the dry color, I was putting down enough color for the intensity that I was used to from other brands. And then when I first started laying down water with these pencils, oh my God, it was like the muddiest, grossest. Oh, it was not pretty. I have a feeling you guys are going to ask me to post this somewhere. Just let me just tell you, I hate you guys already for asking. I'm kidding. I don't hate you guys. But yeah, you have to get used to how much color comes out. So if you get these and start using them for the first time, just keep that in mind. Really start with a light hand. here you go. As I was rambling, you know, I was painting, and I tried to keep my brush strokes as directionless as possible so that everything looks smooth. I don't have like a direction of texture, but if I do have a little bit, and that is going along the roundedness of the cylinder. So always pay attention to your brush strokes, your pencil strokes, the direction they're going in, and match it up with what you're trying to paint. You know, the texture of your fabric, the texture of your piece of furniture, okay, whatever you are painting. And then, as usual, to create the highlights, I get a clean brush, I wet it with water, I put a little bit of water down where I want the highlight, and then I take a dry brush or a brush with the same brush with the water squeezed out, and then I scoop up just that running water diluted paint that's sitting on the surface. And that's how I get that soft color on the highlight side. My second favorite thing about watercolor pencils is how you can easily create textures. So I'm working on cold press watercolor paper that has a distinct texture tooth to it. So you can see when I lay down the dry color pencil, you're seeing all those white spaces because of the tooth of the paper. And again, I'm laying down the color, and I'm laying down more color pencil in the areas where I want the shadow. Now I'm taking this super stiff brush, okay? See how I stab myself with it and the bristles don't move? It's very stiff. This is actually a very cheap oil brush. Okay? Not all oil brushes are stiff like this, but you're not going to find a watercolor brush like this. This is for oils, and I just lopped off the end with a saw because oil brushes tend to be super long. I wet it with some clean water. I sop up most of the water from the brush because I don't want to paint it all smooth. My goal is to get kind of a wet, dry, crinkly, fuzzy texture. And so I stipple the water onto my color pencil. Tap, 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 tap. Whenever I use the word stipple, I always think of Bob Ross. Stipple, stipple, stipple. I love him. Anyway, so I stipple down the water, and it activates bits of the watercolor pencil, and it leaves other parts of the watercolor pencil dry, and that's how you create this texture. And like any other watercolor, the more water you add, the lighter the color becomes. And so I use an even drier brush to do the shadows because I don't want to add too much water and then dilute the paint in those areas. Okay? So when I have my brush more full of water, I will do the light areas, and then as I run out of water, I'll start working on the shadow areas. And you have to treat them like two separate colors, you know, the base color and the shadow color, and don't go back and forth, all right, because then you're going to like add dark stuff to the light areas, okay? Make sure you clean out your brush before you go back and forth. If you are worried about getting a super clean edge, I just take down, this is a little scrap of Bristol I had hanging out from my embossing video, and I'm just stippling right on top of that, just along the edge, so that you will create a nice clean edge. However, when I am trying to illustrate fuzzy sweaters, like I have an illustrating knits video, and in that, I want the fuzziness of the knit to come out past the silhouette a little bit so that the fabric really looks fuzzy. And so I won't try to mask off for a clean line. I'll just keep stippling a little bit past the edge, and the whole sweater looks fuzzy. Now, watercolor pencils are paint. And so you can also just take a little piece of paper and lay down the dry color, you know, and mix different shades and then activate it with a brush and then just paint with that as if that were your palette. Now I'm using the Derwent regular watercolors, not the Inktense ones. And you know what? They're not as intense as the Inktense, but they are still really great. And I have both, and I mix them. You know, I use them together in the same illustration, or I mix the colors together. I do that all the time, and it works fine. You know, and I have all these brands because I like testing all these brands. And I also, you know, like the different colors offered in the different lines so that I can get the exact shade that I want. So I don't have a set of Prismacolor watercolor pencils, but I know a lot of my students in my classes have used them with pretty good results. And so that is a budget-friendly option for you guys to check out. But yeah, you know, I went over all these watercolor techniques in my watercolor shading video. So you can watch that one if you haven't already for more details on what I just did. But yeah, you can just take a little scrap piece of paper and lay down the paint, mix your colors, and pick it up with a water brush or with a regular wet paintbrush and just use it like a paint. You know how when you get a watercolor pan, and you have all those little dry pans of color? I mean, this is just a stick form of that, you know, that dry watercolor. So again, I'd like to point out that these are just dry paints. You lay them down like color pencil, but then you activate them with water. And I'm going to do what I did with the red cylinder, but now with the Faber-Castell Albrecht watercolor pencils. And this is the first brand I started using. For a long time, I didn't even know about the existence of watercolor pencils. And then the school I was working at, they asked me to teach a new class. Well, new to me, it was an existing class. And the curriculum said that they were going to cover watercolor pencils. I was like, oh crap, I guess I have to learn these. And no, I didn't tell my boss. I didn't know how to use them, please. So, I mean, he didn't ask either. He was like, can you teach this class? I'm like, sure, no problem. And so I went to the art store, grabbed what was on the supply list, and I went home and I just played around with these and just kind of figured things out. Back then, I didn't know that there were all these YouTube tutorials that would have come in so handy all those many years ago, but whatever. I figured it out, you know, and I think I did a pretty good job of figuring it out and teaching it to my students. And now I'm very comfortable with them and I really love them. And yeah, getting a smooth texture, you know, pushing out the dry color pencil texture is just a matter of applying enough water and using clean, smooth brush strokes. I'm going along the cone, smoothing out the texture and not blending too much. And like I did in my watercolor shading video, you know, you can go in on a shape after it's dry and add in more shadow. Another thing I love about watercolor pencil is that you can get really intense colors in small detail work relatively easily. Like if I wanted to do a bunch of polka dots, I lay down some water and I am tapping so lightly right now, but oh so gently laying down these dots. This is me using the same amount of pressure on dry paper. You see how that does nothing? So yeah, that's another thing I love to do. Here's another trick for laying down smooth deposits of color using watercolor pencil. Take a clean pencil sharpener and then I sharpen the watercolor pencil and I take out the shavings, I remove the wood parts, I wet the area I want to paint, and I just add the paint, the dry little speckles of paint. Again, you remember when I was talking about wet on wet technique and how I said, just because you can't see the water doesn't mean you could just spread it anywhere, because paint will want to go anywhere the water is. It just wants to move with the water. And so you want to make sure that you contain your water to the area that you want to paint later on. So now you got all those little paint chips on the wet part of this cone. And now I'm taking a regular brush and I'm wetting it. You see that? So you can create textures like this by just stippling, or you can melt down all the watercolor pencil by just smoothly pushing the color around until it dissolves in the water. And see how you can get just almost opaque, smooth, vibrant, gorgeous color in this way. None of this back and forth, none of this pre-coloring. Just look at the intensity of that color. I mean, granted, some of it is because the Inktense pencils are the bomb. No, wait, I think the cool kids are saying it without the. It's, this is bomb. But yeah, you just keep going until you run out of the little flakes. Look at that. Is that not beautiful? Tell me it's not beautiful, and I will call you a liar. That is a hilarious looking cone with the red half and the polka dotted bottom. Let's talk about some things you should not do. If you want a soft blended look, you can't just stop the color pencil and expect yourself to blend it out later. You do want to dry color a soft gradation, even if it's not the most perfectly well blended, but you know, smooth it out so that it gets lighter and lighter towards the edges. And in painting, the rule of thumb is, if you want smooth color across the section that you want to paint, you have to let everything be wet at the same time and dry at the same time. And when you draw these little sections, when you paint these little sections and you don't push the paint across and you let sections dry, you are going to see strange splits and cuts and lines of demarcation. And if that's what you want, that's fine, but see how I can't blend it out anymore because I let it dry too much and I didn't have any of that dry color, you know, pushed into that white space. So now you have a real split that I cannot get rid of really. And if that's what you want, awesome. I just showed you how to do that. But if that's not what you were looking for, don't do this. Don't do this. I mean, there might be a case where you want that, but right now, as like a smoothly shadowed and highlighted cylinder, it is not working for me. Now, if you make any kind of errors with watercolor pencil, the best way to fix your errors is for you to wait for everything to dry. And then you can erase parts by adding a little water and scooping up diluted paint. Or you can add more color by adding dry color pencil on top and re-wetting everything. But if you add dry color pencil on top of wet paper, damp paper, it creates this streaky, muddy mess. And you'll see like little bits of paper rolling up from you overworking wet paper. So in case it wasn't clear, don't do these things. But see, look, now I'm going back in on this red cylinder with a darker red. I was using the lighter red before and I did the whole cylinder, and now I'm using the darker red. I used the poppy red for the base. And now I'm going in with the Chilli red because let's pretend I wanted a more intense shadow there. But it looks nice because I'm putting the dry color pencil on top of dry paper, and I'm going to go in with a damp brush, not sopping wet, because then you'll dilute the color too much, and just smoothing it out. And now you have this really great intense shadow on one side of the cylinder. Sometimes you don't want everything smooth and beautiful and perfect. Maybe you want a bit of a abnormal texture. And one of the things I like to do is to dip the pencil directly in the water so that it partially activates the paint. So I'm getting these cool, wet, dry pencil strokes with my watercolor pencil. And this is just a fun way to create a cool texture that would be much harder to mimic with straight watercolor. And now I'm taking that super stiff, cheapy oil brush that I was using before and kind of pushing the color across the cylinder with water. But again, I'm not trying to go for something smoothly blended. I'm trying to keep a little bit of that kind of chunky, streaky texture. And so that's why I'm using this dry, stiff brush. And now I'm adding some more of the color pencil to my wet cylinder because I want that weird chunky texture. Okay? And then I'm going to use a regular brush with some water because I want the highlight to look a little bit smooth. That part is looking a little bit too choppy for me. So I'm going to smooth that out a little bit. But I'm not going to concern myself with making it look perfect because I like the texture that I created on the left-hand side. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button, share with your friends so that y'all can enjoy the beauties of watercolor pencil together. Subscribe if you haven't already. This is the end of the shading series for now, but I have super cool new concepts for the Fundamentals Friday lineup coming up. So hit subscribe if you want alerts for my future videos. #always be practicing, and I will see you in the next video.